Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Courtenay-Alberni.
There's many things we like in this bill, but we have one concern I'd like to highlight. In 2015, almost 3 years ago, in the mandate letter sent to the Ministry of Fisheries and Oceans and Canadian Coast Guard from the Prime Minister, he instructed the Minister to act on recommendations of the Cohen Commission on restoring sockeye salmon in the Fraser River. In Recommendation 3, he says that, of the report of Justice Cohen, it recommends that, quote, the Government of Canada should remove the Department of Fisheries and Oceans mandate the promotion of salmon farming as an industry and farm salmon as a product, end quote. Yet DFO continues to promote salmon farming industry and the product. Mr. Speaker, people at home don't understand how DFO can both market fish farming but also have the same mandate to protect our wild salmon. So my question to my honourable colleague is, when will the government finally act on this recommendation? This was a recommendation set out again 3 years ago, Mr. Speaker.
Bonavista, Bureau and Trinity.
Mr. Speaker, as we know, of course, there are differing circumstances across Canadian jurisdiction when it comes to fish farming and aquaculture farming. Eastern Canada is very different from Western Canada. You know, it's managed at different levels of government, and at this stage we know that we've seen some significant gains and some improvements in the aquaculture industry in Eastern Canada, and has created badly needed jobs in many of our rural communities. And in terms of the member's question in regards to Western Canada, I can't say that I have the information necessarily to answer that question directly. I do know that when I sat in a Fisheries Committee session some time ago with the Commissioner, identified some issues around the aquaculture industry, and of course issues that need to be addressed by DFO, and of course we're looking forward, like everybody else, to having some of these matters addressed.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Courtenay-Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague from British Columbia. Mr. Speaker, when my colleague was in government, they commissioned Justice Cohen to study the decline of the sockeye in the Fraser River. And one of the recommendations, recommendation number 3, was, quote, that the Government of Canada should remove the Department of Fisheries and Oceans mandate the promotion of salmon farming as an industry and farm salmon as a product, end quote. Yet DFO continues to promote salmon farming and industry and the product, but it also has the mandate of protecting our fish. Now, Mr. Speaker, even the Pacific Salmon Foundation, who I'm sure the member will agree has been a great steward and advocate for wild fish in British Columbia, on May 9th put out a release, quote, the Pacific Salmon Foundation believes that British Columbia and Canada must put wild Pacific salmon first, and that a move to close containment salmon aquaculture is recommended, end quote. Mr. Speaker, it's clear that the Liberals have left this absent in this new legislation. The Conservative government before didn't implement the recommendation of Justice Cohen, and maybe if the member could speak whether he supports this recommendation by Justice Cohen or not.
For Abbotsford.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for that very, very good question. I never expected to get that question in this debate, but it is a good one. Yes, we were just talking about it. In fact, I can tell the member I'm very familiar with the work of the Pacific Salmon Foundation. In fact, I recently spoke to Brian Riddell, who's the executive director of that foundation, and we talked about that very issue, this recommendation that Commissioner Cohen had made, and we're looking at that very carefully. And the Pacific salmon are iconic to the West Coast, and it's very clear that the salmon are facing significant challenges. And I know that one of the recommendations, not only coming out of the Cohen Commission report, but now coming out of the Pacific Salmon Foundation, is to have a very close look at salmon farming on the West Coast and understand that the most recent science on it seems to indicate that, in fact, fish farms are contributing to wild salmon mortality and declining salmon stocks. So, Mr. Speaker, I can assure the member we're looking at this very, very closely, and I'd be quite prepared to enter into a further dialogue with him on this.